This tutorial is a quick and simple guide to Node.js, the Express framework, and MongoDB, focusing on the fundamental REST routes and basic database interaction. You'll build a simple API boilerplate that can then be used as the foundation for any app. So you should have a basic understanding of REST APIs and CRUD operations, which is just create, read, update, and delete. And you should also have some understanding of some basic JavaScript knowledge. I use ES6, mainly fat arrow functions, but nothing too complex. For this tutorial, we'll create the skeleton of a backend for a note-taking app. Think something like Google Keep. You'll want to be able to do all 4 CRUD actions on your notes, like I was saying: create, read, update, and delete. Special thanks to Scott Domes, who wrote an article that this video is based off of. If you want to see the original article, you can check the description. Okay, let's get started. Okay, I created a directory for this project just called Notable. I'm in that directory in the terminal now. If you don't have Node installed, check the link in the description for instructions on how to install Node. So once you're in the new directory, we're just going to run npm init, and then we're going to follow along with the prompts. We'll just give it the name Notable that's already set there, version 1.1. We don't have to do really any of this stuff, so I'm just going to use the default for all of this. Yes. Okay, once that's done, you should have a package.json ready to go in your directory. So this means you can just start installing the dependencies you need for your project. You're going to use Express as your framework, MongoDB as the database, and a package called body parser to help deal with JSON requests. So I'll just do npm install save express MongoDB body parser. And I also highly recommend installing NodeMon as a dev dependency. It's a simple little package that automatically restarts your server when files change. Okay, I got everything installed, and now I just open up the folder in Sublime Text. So I'm going to go into the package.json file right here, and then under scripts, I'm just going to add nodemon server.js, and we're not even going to use this test one, so I'll take that out, and that should be good on package.json. So I'm going to save that, and now I'm going to create my server.js file and start building the API. So I'll go to new file, server.js. So first we're going to start by requiring all our dependencies in server.js. So const express const mongo client const body parser and let's just line up everything here. Okay, and then finally const app express. You're going to use the Mongo client to interact with your database. Note that you also initialize your app as an instance of Express, your framework. The last thing you need to do to get your server up and running is to tell your app to start listening for the HTTP requests. You can specify the port and start the listening like so. Console.log, we'll just do a log here, and we are live on port. Now I'm going to save this. I'll go back to my console. Let me clear that. If I run npm run dev, we should see an error. Okay, Express is not defined. Let's see what we have to do here. I spelled this wrong, so let's save that and go back over. Okay, it automatically saw the changes, it restarted, and it says we are live on 8,000. So our server is live, but it doesn't do a whole lot, or anything really. So let's fix that. We're going to make some CRUD routes. So for this example, we're going to build 4 routes. A route to create a note, to read your notes, to update a note, and to delete a note. So this will give a good idea of how to structure almost any basic route with Node. To test the API, we're going to need to mimic a client side making requests. So to do so, we're going to use a great app called Postman. It allows you to make simple HTTP requests with custom bodies and parameters. So to install Postman, you can go to getpostman.com and you can download it for various browsers. There's also a Chrome extension. So I'm just going to go to Postman Chrome extension and add to Chrome. So this is one of the easiest ways to get it. You don't have to install any special program on your computer. And you don't even have to sign up. I'll just do take me straight to the app. Okay, once you get Postman installed, it should look like this. We're going to come back to this later. So let's start setting up our routes. Most Node.js tutorials and many real apps put all their routes in one big routes.js file. But we're going to do something different. We're going to split up the files into separate folders, and that's going to lead to good readability and makes big apps more manageable. Now, we don't have a big app, but let's do this right. So we're going to make some directories and some folders. I'm just going to do it right from the console. You can do it from your file browser or from Sublime. Okay, first we'll stop the server. So I'm just going to make a directory called app, and I'm going to go into that directory. And then I'm going to make a directory called routes. And then I'm just going to go into that directory. And then I'm going to make a file called index.js, and then I'm going to make a file called noteroutes.js. Okay, we're going to go back into Sublime Text, and we'll see if they're showing up here. And you can see they're right on the side. So the index.js is empty, and then routes.js is empty. So these directories may seem like overkill for this simple small app, but it's just always good to start with best practices. And let's start with the C in CRUD, which is create. So how would you create a note? Well, before you do that, you have to build a bit more infrastructure. In Express, routes are wrapped in a function, which takes the Express instance and a database as arguments. Here's what I mean. In your note routes.js, we're going to put module.exports equals function appdb, just like that. And then you can export this function through your index.js. So let's start filling in that file. First, we're going to have a const note routes equals require, and we're going to require the notes routes file, what we just exported, and then module.exports. And it looks like I made a spelling error here. So exports, there we go. Note routes app db. So we're just going to export that route. So basically the index.js is our master route file, and then we have individual files for all of our individual routes, and we just bring them all together in the index.js. So now that we've exported the routes here, we can import it in our server. So back in server.js, we go right here, and I'm going to put require app / routes. That's going to our directory. So this is how we're going to basically import the route into our server. Note that since you don't have a database yet set up, you're just passing in an empty object. That's why we just have an empty object right here. Okay, now we can make the create route. So the syntax is simple. We're going to go back into our note routes.js, and we're going to actually start creating the route here. So we're going to do app.post. Here is where we'll actually create our note. So we'll create the note here. But right now we're just going to do res.send hello. So when the app receives a post request to the notes path here, it will execute the code inside the callback. So that's the callback right here. So that's the callback right here. And in that callback, it's going to pass in the request object, which contains the parameters or JSON of the request, and a response object, which is used to reply. So we're going to actually test this by going into Postman. First, I'm going to make sure all my files are saved. I'm going to run my server again with npm run dev. Uh-oh, I have an error. It says requires not defined. I actually have a spelling error. You may have seen that earlier. So I just have to put require here. Okay, now that I've fixed that error, let's try running our server again. And another error. Looks like, oh, I see what happened. I spelled the word function wrong. A lot of spelling errors here. Okay, so now let's see what happens. We're just restarting the server here, and now we're gonna finally get to test this on NodeMon. So back in NodeMon, I'm going to do a post request instead of get. I'm gonna go to post here, and now I'm gonna put localhost 8000/notes, and then I'm just gonna click send. And you can see it says hello here. It's pretty small. But if we go back into our file, it says res.send hello. So it just sent hello when we did a post request to the notes route. So we just created our first real route. The next step is to add some parameters to the request and process them in the API, and finally add in the database. So I'm going to go back into Postman. I'm going to try to zoom in a little, actually, so everything's a little bigger. And in the body tab, we're going to add some key value pairs after selecting the XWW form -URL encoded. So this will add encoded form data to the request, which we'll be able to process with the API. So we're just going to make a title, my note title. So this is just some sample data. Body. What a great note. Now, before I send the sample data, I'm going to go back into our note routes, and we're going to do console.log. And I'm going to put rec.body. So we're just going to log out the body of the request. So I'll save that, and we're going to go back over here. I'll send this. And then we'll see undefined. You can see undefined here. That's because Express can't process URL encoded forms on its own. But we did install the body parser package. So let's go back into our code. We're going to go back into the server, and right below the port, I'm going to do app.use body parser .url encoded and extended true. Now it's going to be able to process that correctly. So if I save this and I'm going to go back into Postman, I'm going to send that again. Let's go back into our server, and now we can see it. Title, my note title, body. What a great note. The last step in the preliminary route is to set up the database and then add the data in. The easiest way to set up a Mongo database is through MLab. It's free for the small size and quite fast to set up. So let's do that. We're going to go over to our browser, and we're going to go to imlab.com. Now you're going to create an account if you don't already have one, or for me I'm just going to log in. Okay, after you get logged in to imlab or you create an account, we're going to create a new MongoDB deployment. So I'm just going to click create new and just click the free one here. Continue. Continue. And I'm going to call it Notable. Continue. And submit order. And now I have to just create a user. So first I'm going to go into the deployment and go to user, add database user. So I'm going to call it BoFCC, and I put in a password and create. And now I just have to copy this URL right here. So I'm going to go to copy. Okay, now I'm in my console and I'm in the root directory, the notable directory. I'm going to create a configuration file. First, I'm going to create a config directory. Now, I'm going to go into that directory. And now I'm going to create a db.js file where we're going to put our configuration for our database. So I'm going to go back into Sublime. There we go. And here is my config directory that I just created. And here's my database file. So in this file, we're going to add the URL. So module.exports equals, this is the URL we just copied on MongoDB. URL, and we're going to make sure it's in parentheses. So I just copied this. Now I also have to insert my username and password. So the username is BoFCC. The password, this is a very secure password. It's just password. And I will change that in a little bit here. Now if you are going to commit this project to GitHub, you want to be sure to include the .gitignore file so that you don't share your password with everyone like I'm doing through this video. So now in the server.js file, we can use the Mongo client to connect to the database and then use this to wrap the app setup. So let's see how to do that. First, we're going to require it. So const db, we're requiring the database, that database configuration file, require okay, now I'm going to line this up here. And then down here, we're going to use the Mongo client. So Mongo client.connect, so we can connect to the database. db.url, that's from the URL that we just created in the configuration file. And we're going to pass in, we're going to create a callback function. We're going to pass in the error and the database. And we're going to check if there is an error. And if so, we're going to return. We're just going to log the error. Okay, this next part, this text up here, we're going to put into our Mongo client.connect. So I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to put right here. So I just paste it in there. We're just going to change a few things. So instead of passing in an empty object here, I'm just going to pass in database. And actually, that's all we're going to change. So that's the last of the infrastructure setup. It's all route building from here. MongoDB stores data in collections, which are exactly how they sound. In this case, we want to store notes in a collection called notes. So since we pass in the database as the DB argument in the routes, see right here, we're passing in the database right here in the routes, so we can then access it like so. Well, first let's delete this. This was just temporary. And if we write db.collection and notes, so that's just how we would access our database. So creating a note is as simple as calling insert on the collections. So we can put .insert, and we pass in the note that we still have to create the note, but we're also going to pass in a callback function with an error and results. Okay, so we pass in the note here. I'm going to create the note right above this line. So const note equals, now it's just going to be a JSON object, and it's going to be text is going to equal rec.body.body. So rec.body.body just gets the body variable from the request. So rec.body.body just gets the body variable from the request here. So if we go into the to Postman, we can see that we're passing in the title and a body. So that's where we're getting that body there. So I'm also going to create the note with a title. Rec.body.title. Okay, once the insert is complete or has failed for whatever reason, we want to either send back an error or send back the newly created note object. So here's how we finish this code up here. If error res.send, we're going to send an error. This is just JSON here. An error has occurred. Else res.send result.ops 0. So the result to ops is going to be an array here, and we're just going to send the 0th element, or the first element in the array back, which is the note that we just created. So let's try it out. I'm going to save this. I'm going to make sure my server is running. It is. Now I'll go into Postman, and we're going to send a x-www-form-url encoded post request with Postman with a title and a body, just like we have here. So I'm just going to click send, and there was an error connecting to the server. So let's see what we did wrong. Result is not defined. Okay, here's the problem. I have results here and I have a result there. So this was supposed to be the same. So result, now it's a singular and singular. So let me save that, and we're going to go back into Postman. We're going to send this again, and here we go. We got this. The text is "what a great note," and the title is "my note title." So we got this response from the server, and it also assigned an ID to it. So let's go into MLab now. So if we go into MLab, we go to collections, and then I refresh here, we can see there's now a collection called notes. And in there, what a great note, and my note title. And it looks like it created a note twice, one for the error and one for the one that did not cause an error. It still created the note both times, but the response caused the error, so it didn't show up in the response. And I actually can delete it right through MLab, so I'm going to hit the delete button here. Okay, so now we just have one note in our database. Now the read route. We can pick up the pace a bit. So say you want to get back the note that we just created by navigating to, let's say we wanted to go to localhost 3000/notes/ and then we put some ID. So in this case, the ID would be this bit number right here. And I want to put the ID, and then does that do anything? No, it doesn't. But we can easily create that. So here's what that would look like in the notes.route.js. So we're going to create another route here, app.get. So instead of a post, it's a get. So this is how we get data from the server. Notes/ and then ID. We're going to go to that route, note/ID, rec res. So it's pretty similar to this one up here, the app.post. You have the route, and we create a callback function with rec and res. Just like before, we're going to call a method on the database collection of notes. So here it's going to be the aptly named find1. We're going to find one element from the database. So first I'm going to create a variable called details which is going to be the element we're trying to get from the database. So it's going to equal, trying to get something with the ID, and the ID is going to equal, well, I'm just going to put a temporary thing. ID goes here. I have to show you later how we're going to actually put the ID in there. But first I'm going to show you the rest of this code. So if we do db.collection and notes dot find one details, we're going to pass in the error and the item to this callback function. And now the error and the result is going to look very similar to this code down here. So I'm just going to copy this and paste that in. But instead of the result.opt0, I'm just going to put item. We're going to return the item, which gets it right from here. So let's go back to this ID up here. Now we could grab the ID from the URL parameters via rec.params.id. However, if you just try to plop in the string into this above, it won't work. MongoDB requires not just an ID as a string, but an ID as an object, or as I call it, an object ID. So that's actually an easy fix to do. We're going to have to require something at the top. So I'm going to do var object ID equals require MongoDB dot object ID. And then down here after the get command, app.get, I'm going to put const ID equals rec.params.id. So now this ID is just the string of the ID from the parameters in the URL. Now we can fill in the rest of this. So the ID, we're going to take this off where it says ID goes here, and I'm going to put new object ID. So it's going to create that ID as an object to pass into Mongo. So let's try it out. I'm going to save this. I'm going to check my server to see if there's no errors, and there is an error. So let's go back. Okay, here's the problem. I need a parentheses here, and I have to take off this parentheses, and while I'm at it, I'll add some semicolons. Okay, let's go back to the database to see if there's an error. Okay, no error. So I'm actually, this time I'm going to go to my browser and just refresh this. Oh, and this is actually supposed to be 8,000 instead of 3,000. So let's do that. And it returns with the ID, the text, what a great note, and my note title. You can also do it in Postman. First of all, let me copy this. Let's see if that's the same one. Yep, that's the same ID. So I'm going to do a get, and I'm going to do slash and then put the ID there, send that, and yep, it comes back with my what a great note, my note title, and that was directly from the database. Okay, now the delete route. Deleting an object is actually pretty much the same as finding an object. So I'm just going to copy the get code, the find code, because we're just going to make a few changes to make it the delete code. So we're just going to use instead of find one, we're going to use remove. Also, instead of get, we have to show that it's a delete request. And then here, instead of sending back the item, there is no item. So we're going to send note plus ID deleted. And let me put another space in here. And that's the delete route. And now the update route. This is the last one. The put is basically a hybrid between read and create. You find the object, then update it accordingly. So the put is basically a hybrid between the read route, that's this one, and the create route, which is this one here. So you find the object and then update it accordingly. So I'm going to copy this one right up here, and let's put it right here. So instead of get, it's going to be put, and this is going to be the same, this is going to be the same, but now I'm going to get this line from here, the const note equals, and then the JSON object with the text and the title. I'm going to put it right here under the details. And now we're going to change this next line a little bit. db.collection notes.update, and we're going to pass in the details and the note, and then after we pass in the note, everything else is going to stay the same. So let's go into Postman and we're going to try these out. So first of all, let's try this delete request. So if I pass in delete and send that over, this note was deleted. And if we go back into MongoDB, and if I refresh, there is no longer a note in our database. So let's create another note by doing a post. And this time I'm going to have to pass in a body, and I'll say my note title and put some exclamation points in here so it'll be different. We'll send that, and if we get this ID here, I can now do a GET request, send that, and we get that note back that we just created. And again, it's going to be in MongoDB. If I refresh MongoDB, yep, our note is there. What a great note, my note title. And if I go, now we're going to try the put. So here I'm going to pass in this body. So I'm going to go to this route here, but I'm going to, instead of saying what a great note, I'm going to say what a bad note and send that over. Okay, let's see if that worked. We'll go over to our MongoDB and refresh it. And it's hard to see here, but it still says what a bad note. So it has changed. And if we go back, we can even do another get to see what it is. So if I send a get, what a bad note. So now we have every route in CRUD. We have create, read, update, and delete. Note the imperfection in this code. If you fail to supply a body or title, the put request will nullify those fields on the note in the database. You could easily add some conditional logic to update the fields only if they're present in the request. I left that out just to keep it simple. Well, that's it. You have a working Node API with each of the 4 major CRUD operations. The goal of this tutorial was to give you a degree of familiarity with Express, Node, and MongoDB. You can use your simple app as a launching pad for more complex projects. My name is Bo Carnes. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, use your code for good.